Thank you, Marie, for accepting to be part of this conversation. I know you have a lot to share about your journey of parenting children and youth with FASD. So today, I think you wanted to tell us a little bit about your journey, but maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself first.
I'm Murray. My wife Sandra and I live in southwestern Ontario in a fairly large city. We've adopted two boys from the public system. Both have an FASD diagnosis. Our younger one has other ones, including intellectual disability, ADHD, several other comorbidities. We've had both our sons since very young. Like, youngest came straight from the hospital to us. Our older one when he was 9 weeks old. We have had some challenges over the past few years. Getting diagnosis it's always been a challenge. Getting access to the various resources that we need. With the intellectual disability, he's eligible to receive services from developmental services, but an ongoing issue is the lack of people to provide service.
Yeah, recruitment and staff has been, I think, worse since COVID. Did you have more challenges when the COVID hit?
Yes, things got really bad with COVID. We're starting to have some challenges. We had some trying to get behavior consultations probably for a couple of years before. It was really hard, but nobody really kind of grasped the level of challenges. We were trying to get some accesses to like overnight respite or weekend respite, and just nothing became available. We actually finally got a call in the last couple of months that he was available, that there might be some respite spots opening up, which is kind of funny because he wasn't in our home at the time. I guess to hop back to your earlier question, Maude, we were starting to have some challenges before the pandemic with some escalating incidents of violence. But once COVID hit, things just became so very difficult. The first month or so, my wife and I both had COVID symptoms. Our younger one had COVID symptoms. For the first month or so, when the weather was still kind of yucky, it was easy to keep him inside and able to go. From the time he was little, he's done lots of stuff. He's played hockey, he's played basketball, he loves to ride his bike, all sorts of outdoor activities. Once the weather started turning nice, this is going to have to be edited out. Once the weather started turning nice, he wanted to start going out to go on the playgrounds, ride his bike and whatever. But at this point, there was all the restrictions where playgrounds were closed, swings were blocked off. All we could basically do was go out and walk. I was starting to work a bit. My work had reduced hours for a while. It ended up, though, that we would let him go outside, but then we were getting reports from the community that he was getting into trouble. He was throwing rocks at people. He was calling people names. He was ripping around, racing around. There's a church parking lot close to us where you go and ride his bike, where there's a school. He would be unsafe in the parking lot. So eventually we started trying to restrain isn't the right word, limit his outside time when somebody could go with him. But it kept getting more and more difficult.
Young person who needs 24 supervision, basically. I think
that's where it has got to. Yes, it was getting that if we could trust him at one point to go around a block or two, but eventually he just started getting into trouble. He found other kids in the neighborhood he got in trouble with, but as we tried to keep him home, he started getting more and more violent with us. He would throw stuff in his bedroom. He would throw pretty much anything he could get his hands on. He would bite us, hit us, kick us. It was very difficult to try and keep him safe, my wife safe, as well as our other son safe as well. It became very serious. We've had tons of bruises and nothing broken, but lots of bruises and broken glasses and broken furniture and broken bedding. And fortunately, you have an older home that has plaster, so we don't have the holes that other people have experienced. But
But this is
We have
certainly an
density class.
experience that a lot of families who experience AFCA will relate to. And I think a difficult option for some of these families is to have the child live in a different environment. And this is a decision that you had to do at some point, you and Sandra. And I wonder, how did you go about in making this decision?
It was a really difficult point to get to that. We tried so hard to access different supports. And we had an organization that had been providing us some periodic respite support. They were able to, the school was really good. They made arrangements for him to be able to stay at another place for a week while we caught our breath. They ended up adding, we ended up getting a wraparound team together with people from CAS, developmental services, the local police, some different other agencies in our community as well that are able to help. But it ended up that they ended up getting some respite workers, which were very hard to come by because of the system was just, Maude already mentioned this, as this after COVID, a lot of people just left the system because the hours were so, because services were cut so severely in 2020. And there's still, even in 2023, we're still having a shortage of workers because it's so, it can be such a hard thing to do.
And
We ended up, sorry.
so I'm also wondering, were you still hopeful when you were making those decisions, or like how did you feel?
It was so hard. It was like one step ahead of another. I was still working my full-time job,
Mm.
and he would come off, he'd go to school and he would come off the bus at the end of the day. Okay, Dad, what are we doing now? It's like, I barely finished work. Like, and he would want to go for, 3, 4 hours. He'd want to go ride his bike. He'd want to go play basketball. He'd want to go and do any number of things that we could do. And I just didn't have the energy because, by the time he'd go to bed at 8 o'clock and I'd fall over on the couch almost just exhausted because I had nothing left.
Mm.
Fortunately, we did find some respite workers. We ended up in the summer, we got him into a lot of camps, which was really good for him and for us. But it was just, there just seemed to be phases though too when he went into like a 2 week respite placement while we went on vacation, and somebody was with him pretty much every day. And that just seemed to increase his appetite for somebody to pay attention to him even more than he had been. Like before we had the respite workers, he'd be willing to sit and we could watch TV or we could watch a movie or he'd play a video game. And eventually it's like, okay, well, I got to go. Like once there was one afternoon, I asked him for like 15 minutes and no, he was just gone out the door looking for a neighborhood kid. And after we came back from the respite, he couldn't wait even 5 minutes when we asked him, well, we're going to go and do something. Just give us a couple minutes to get some stuff together. And it just got worse. It got to the point that the violence was so bad. We ended up having to have him transported voluntarily by hospital, like after a 3 or 3.5 hours of intense activity, walking 3 or 4 kilometers home, and then still after a half-hour rage that we ended up having the police transport him to hospital, and they wouldn't admit him because he had calmed down.
Mm-hmm. So lots of hospitals visits and even hospital stays, violence getting worse. So then he started living somewhere else. How's that going?
After um it has been a challenge having him go somewhere else, but for him to go somewhere else, we've tried hospital stays, we tried bringing him home, but there just wasn't enough resources. Like once routines like school or whatever goes off the rails, that just blows everything up. Just completely blows everything up. Routine is so important for our kids. It ended up he just lost it on some kids at a skating rink, and I ended up saying to the police, just take him. I ended up having to stay with him for quite a while they got somebody to stay with him. When he was in the hospital, he had someone with him 24/7 because he's so vulnerable. he's functions like a 5-year-old and he's a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Having him placed in a group home was difficult, but we just couldn't anymore. I was so exhausted constantly. My wife was worried for my health. Like I would just go from one thing to another, and nothing could satisfy his urge for activity. Even with respite workers coming, 3 or 4 times a week, he still wanted to go and do more. It just nothing was enough. It came to the difficult point where we were fighting with CAS. I was like, we can't keep him safe. There's just no way we can keep him safe. He we've had the police came to our home many times. That was part of the direction, is if we started getting violent or breaking stuff or hurting somebody, was to call the police. We probably had at least 30 calls last year when the police came to our home. We got to recognize many police officers. Many police officers are very good. It's just unfortunate that there's no there what's called when everything goes wrong. It might be a mental health call or whatever. The police are the
Mm-hmm.
first ones that are called. It's unfortunate that that's the way our system is right now. Once he was in a placement, it was hard to find a place. We're very fortunate that he's been able to be placed locally. It probably took 3 months before people started saying, "Oh, you don't look as tired anymore." Um, we've had to. We still see our son very regularly. He's 10 minutes from home. We see him probably 2 or 3, 4 times a week. We have arranged for activities for him that he loves to be involved with. He loves hockey. He loves soccer. We've supported him in these things. We can go and see him play. But something that was very challenging was when it was time to go. If he wasn't ready to go, it was a battle to get him in the car to go back home. And then you have to deal with him. Who knows what's going to happen when you get home? Is he going to be willing to have a snack and go to bed? Is he going to be up all night? What has been very freeing is when he's been in the group home, is the workers, we will go to an activity. Like I went to a hockey game in the spring, and the workers let him kind of do something that's like, well, I'm not sure I would let him do that, but you guys have to deal with it. So it's like, it was very freeing to be able to walk away. There's been other times when things have been not necessarily bad, but just escalated, where the best thing is the workers can deal with him and we just walk away. My wife and I have both found that to be very freeing. It has taken months and months and months. My wife misses him terribly. She misses being able to mother him and to care for him, and all the things are so hard for her. My heart breaks for her that she feels that way, but it just wasn't safe for him to be in our home any longer. Like he's taller than both of us. He's an early teenager and he's got lots of energy, and we don't. He has attacked her many times. There's been times when he was in the hospital that we would have him at a community visit, and the police had to escort him back to hospital just because he was so unsafe with us.
Do you feel like you're more able to enjoy the time that you have
Absolutely.
with him? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's been very freeing to be able um to go, like we can go and do activities with him for a couple hours. We have fun. We've had him come to our home a few times and things have gone generally pretty well. We're able to have a meal. He loves to mow the lawn, so he cuts the lawn. It's a win for me. Um, we can have supper, we'll watch something, and then we'll go and do an activity, and then he can go back to the group home with the workers. The last few nights we've been able to go and do an outdoor activity with him as well.
How do
But
you, I think some parents are not sure what to do, and I don't think it's giving them the advice of what to do, but like, what would you like to share with the families that are not sure if they can continue, if there's maybe lost hope of having a good relationship with their child?
it has been very difficult to not have him in our home, but like I can't say I miss him the same way that my wife does. I did a lot of stuff with him, so I miss the odd time being able to go and do something with him. I don't miss the violence. I don't miss the unpredictability. It probably took me probably 6 months to approach a relatively normal level of energy. We came up with a move. There was a proposed move about 3 months in that would have seen him move across Ontario to be several hours away from us. And at that point, I was able to say, this isn't the best for him or anyone. So I was able to reach out and advocate for him to stay in our area, which was successful. There's some other battles that I can see coming that I have the energy to prepare for now that I wouldn't have. Right before he went in the hospital, the psychiatrist commented, and we hadn't really thought of it, is you guys aren't able to parent this child because you have to staff this child. And the reality of it hadn't really hit at that point. And about a month after he went into the placement, CAS said, well, what have you done to boost your parenting capacity? And I said, I have the capacity to parent now because I don't have to take care of every little need. I don't have to worry about keeping him safe or dealing with a blow up at school. I have the capacity to look ahead and deal with the big picture things, not necessarily little picture things. Being able to co-parent has been a has been freeing for us. Co-parenting is something that we're still working on. The idea of what has been successful isn't necessarily recognized very well, and that's part of the battle. Is how do we, just because there's boxes on the CAS form, well, they don't fit. So part of the education is going to be, okay, well, so how do you make it fit? It's unfortunate that parents in our situation have been forced to give up parental rights to their child to be able to get the child that they need. That is absolutely egregious. There's no way that should be right. We should not have to give up our child because beyond his needs are beyond what we can bear. It's unfortunate that our system
You're
has
still
so
very
few
much the
resources.
parent of this child. You're still parenting him very much, right? Like you're probably
Yeah,
doing more activities with him than the average parent and probably advocating more than the average parent. Yeah, so and even like one thing you mentioned to me before is like how much persistence you need to have when you're advocating for your child. I don't know if this is something you want to talk about.
absolutely. I couldn't even begin to imagine what would happen if we had just kind of rolled over the first time. Like, who knows what would have happened if they hadn't come alongside us. But then at the same time, they're saying, well, everything is right. Very early on in the process, they said, well, we can close this case. They said, well, who's going to protect us from him? Child protection focuses on protecting the child, not the family. And the family should not have to be at risk because a child is complex. The
Hmm.
the system should be able to support the family and say, okay, well, how can we help you? They were wanting to hook us up with family members and members of our community. Our community was unfortunately very small because as we've had dealt with more and more complex needs, it's been hard. People don't really know how to handle our child. We hardly know how to handle them. How can you expect somebody who sees us once a week or twice a week to know what to do with them?
I think it's like in many regions, there's no placement. So sometimes for families, it's not even an option. But I
Mm-hmm.
think with your family and with other families in your situation, we see what's feasible sometimes to co-parent with staff. I think when we get into adoption, we don't necessarily want this as an outcome, but sometimes it happens. And I think there's probably like a grieving process that you went through to realize this is what your child needs, and um, a good outcome will look different than maybe what you expect
Mm-hmm.
when you
Yeah,
adopted.
absolutely. Right now, this is probably the best outcome we could hope for. If he was on the opposite side of Toronto, it would be a whole lot harder to be able to parent him and see him as we do. If he was that far away, we'd probably be able to see him every week or every other week. And he is so bonded with us. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a bond. It's maybe injured because of all the violence and because of all the trauma that's been inflicted because of stuff like all these lockdowns and all these things that have been hard for us. But there's definitely, I would say this is probably the best outcome we could hope for.
Given the
And
situation, for sure.
yeah, yeah. And, some of the workers have commented that, boy, they talk to us a lot, but I think that's probably the best for our child. Like, there's times that if he doesn't talk to us, he gets very upset. For us to be able to talk to him and support them, we actually developed a book in partnership with a worker from the agency that's supporting us that included a whole bunch of tips for what is good for our child, what are his favorite things, talking about FASD, talking about his likes and dislikes. That has really been helpful. And very recently, someone said, "Oh, that's a great book." And again, part of it is that the system is so stretched. Not necessarily everybody has the time or the resources to put this together.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Um, I think we're almost at the end of our time, but I wonder if there's anything else you would like to share with families who are probably in a situation that you were 6 months ago or a year ago.
It is so hard, but don't give up hope. I know it sounds crazy to say that, but 6 months or a year ago, if you would have told me that there was hope, I was just plowing through hoping to, try and keep him in our home. I'm glad that we fought as hard as we did, but I got to the point where it's like I just couldn't anymore. I just could not. There was no possible way that I was losing who I was to care for him. Something that we've done very recently as well, it was the nonviolent resistance, the principles of nonviolent resistance, standing up for your values, being firm, not taking not taking crap from people. I found this to actually be very, very relevant to dealing with the system. Like some of the comments that the workers and the supervisor would ask is like, I said something to the effect of, "We're only two people, we're not a staff." And she said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "What do you mean? What do I mean by that? Because we are only two people. We're around 24/7.
Yeah.
Workers in the home, they switch out every 8 or 12 hours. They get to go home and have a break. We don't. There's different times I've said to the workers, at the end of the day, you get to turn your computer off and walk away. We don't. Um,
Yeah, so you
but
constantly have to reframe and explain to people what it looks like to live with AFCA. Like there's
mhm,
a dedication to do there. Yeah. So you did
yeah,
have to resist some of the comments that are blaming or shaming towards your family. So you feel like NVR and like the whole process
yeah.
helps you dealing with those hurtful comments.
Having people in our corner definitely helped too. Like we felt so isolated. Having people come along and sit beside us in meetings, it changes the whole tone of a meeting. There's a
Mhm.
couple meetings that we have had that have just gone absolutely brutally bad. Having having somebody alongside to sit in our corner and advocate for us definitely makes a difference. Like I people and the thing is people the system wonders why people don't trust people. The system I think thinks people trust them. I remember one time Maude had arranged a meeting with a couple of the supervisors in the different agencies in our community, and she commented that the workers thought but how can we trust them because of the constant barrage of accusations or questions, having to tell the story over again. There are so many things that people offer, or you go to a grocery store and people offer well-meaning advice, but it's like, dude, you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know.
You have no idea. Just move along.
What do you tell yourself, Maria, when you feel like, okay, I need to calm down because this is like like there's some really offensive comments. Like, do you have a tip to like regulate yourself when that happens?
A lot of times it's just move
Mm.
on. And there's people that, you know, I've said very recently to people, there's times that some people, you get to know over time who your safe people are. Um, and there's other people, it's like, how are things fine? Like you know, the house could be burning down, you could have crashed into a hydro pole and knocked out a neighborhood, but for them it's fine. Last night I had the opposite conversation. I was out at a store and I saw a mom who had a son who was obviously on the autism spectrum. And I talked to her. I could tell she was having a hard time. So I talked to her, tried to engage her son, but I gave her some tips on different programs that have been helpful for us. That's I find it very empowering to offer to help come alongside people and advocate.
Yeah,
It's it's very healing. And I actually read something very recently that we do that because we know that we've needed it ourselves, and by us doing that for somebody else is doing something for the younger part of us that needed that.
that's so true. Yeah, I wish you had that early on, you know, the community to come alongside you and walk the journey, because so many of our families have walked this journey and came out the other way, right? Whatever that
Yeah,
means for this specific family. Sometimes that means being able to keep the child in the home. Sometimes it's keeping that relationship and the child lives somewhere else. There's so many outcomes that are
the,
that can be good.
the system is just so complicated. There are so many ways that are, you know, we are fortunate that we are um Canadian by birth, relatively with sufficient resources. For anybody dealing with, you know, with mental health issues or other issues, there's absolutely the system has so many barriers, it's ridiculous. People need advocates, and there's unfortunately not enough resources to provide advocates for these people. The only way people get advocates is people that have had the scars and the bruises themselves to come alongside and help out.
It's true. Thank you so much, Murray. Thank you for sharing your experience. I think if families want support, they can contact us at Adopt for Life, and
Absolutely.
you can be matched with other families who have experienced something.
Absolutely.
Thank you.